Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm just a couple minutes late this morning. Was biking in here and I had a little bit of a headwind, so it was against me the whole way here. So it took me a little longer than I thought, but thanks for taking time, to be here on this day as we continue to go through, the book of Genesis. So let's just jump right in. Hopefully you got a chance to be here this weekend. Got some people asking, hey, why aren't we showing our services online? Just reminding you that there is a live copyright infringement. We can show movies in the church in terms of clips, but we cannot show it, online live. But I'm able to show it sometimes later. So be looking at my personal Facebook social media account, and you might be able, in case you missed it this weekend. I thought it was, some great insights, to God's word illustrated by Spider-Man No Way Home. So with that being said, Genesis chapter 7, we left off. I just want to make sure context. We left off with God has seen that mankind is having evil thoughts only all the time. That's what you call the full depravity of man, where it's only evil all the time. So we'll imagine that kind of world where it's only evil all the time. So when we start thinking about how can God let people die, or His judgment is going to come, to its fruition. There is a point of judgment that takes place. So with that being said, I hear somebody. Hopefully that helps. Sandy. Thank you for that. So Sandy, put in the chat, real quick if you can hear better now. And hopefully that helped, just a little bit, as it pertains. So anybody else having a hard time hearing, let me know. So try to take care of that. So with that being said, so I just want to give you a little background again. So verse 1, when everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the boat with all your family. For among all the people of the earth, I can see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal I have approved for eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of each of the others. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and a female in each pair to ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood. 7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth, and it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights until I have wiped from the earth all the living things I have created." So Noah did everything as the Lord had commanded. So it's been 100 years since he started building, this ark. And so some people have wondered, how in the world do the animals, come to know? You might have seen, what was it? I think it's Evan Almighty. How did it actually happen? Well, actually, if you go back to, again, the Bible usually tells us in Genesis 6:20, last chapter, it says that God would bring the animals to Noah. So the animals were actually brought to him. And so we see this, every kind of pair, and can they all fit, on the ark? Absolutely. And so what is this idea of 40 days? 40 days, we see this number. Numbers have meaning, in the Bible. Like, for example, the number 7 is perfect. It's the number of completion. And so, it says, 40 days and nights. The number 40 was associated in the Bible with testing and purification, especially before entering into something new and significant. So 40 was always the season of testing and purification before moving into something that was meaningful and significant. So let me just remind you of a couple of these things. First, we see Noah's Ark, 40 days, 40 nights. Before this testing and this opportunity. How about Moses? When he goes on Mount Sinai, his time on Mount Sinai was 40 days. What about the spies? The trip to Canaan, it was 40 days. Israel's time in the wilderness, it was 40 years. How about Elijah's miraculous journey to Sinai in 1 Kings 19:8? It's 40 days. What about Jesus when he was tempted, it was led by the Spirit to be tempted in the wilderness in Mark chapter 1. How long was it? 40 days. And so, again, there's this idea of 40 days, the number, again, associated with testing, and purification. So Noah did everything the Lord commanded him to do. Once again, what's fascinating about this is he's never seen rain before. He's like, God's telling him it's going to rain, but it's not yet rain. There's this water canopy that's around the entire earth at this time, and it actually is going to now fall from the sky, and there's going to be now weather patterns that never used to be in place before. Now, Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. This is verse 6. He went on board, the boat to escape the flood. He and his wife and his sons and their wives. With them were all the various kinds of animals, those approved for eating and for sacrifice, and those that were not, along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. They entered the boat in pairs, male and female, again, the way the Lord, had created and intended, just as God had commanded Noah. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. Now, when Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for, as God's promised, 40 days and 40 nights. Now, you might be like, well, is that really going to be enough? If you were, around in Houston where they had that major flooding by just a couple days, if it just pours, dramatically, for 40 constant days, that is a lot of water. Then second, it says there's these springs that come up from the earth. And I think it's called, what am I forgetting? Pangea. I think it's Pangea, where if you put all of the, earth together, in one place, how all the world can actually fit. I think it's called Pangea. Sorry if I've mispronounced or something doesn't sound quite right. But anyway, if you take all of the land masses and put them together, you can see how earthquakes and water could have come up from underneath or within, as well. And then it says that very day, Noah, went into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal. So we're making a make sure that we're hearing this over and over and over. With them in the boat, domestic and wild, large and small, with birds of every kind. 2 by 2, they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes. A male and female, again, this emphasis, male and female, of each kind entered, just as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. So it wasn't Noah who shut the door. It was God's judgment. It was God's finality that actually came, into place. It reminds us again in Matthew chapter 25. Whenever we're like, how in the world can God create this judgment and people are going to die? Go read Matthew 25 and be reminded that ultimately God is very slow. He's very patient. And he gives people all these opportunities to turn to him. But eventually there will be a day of judgment. For 40 days, the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. Remember, it was more like a barge than a ship. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains of the earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. Now, some people are like, man, if Mount Everest is, 15,000 or so, feet high, are we sure it went even above that? We don't know what Mount Everest was at that time. We don't know what earthquakes did and, the coming of the sea. We don't know all that stuff. We can trust, though, that there was actually, this event that took place. And I'll get to that in just a second. It said, let's see, I want to make sure I don't miss this. For 40 days, the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground. Finally, the water, covered the highest mountains on earth. All the living things on the earth died. Birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurried along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. Dry land. Now notice that. So people say, well, how did the fish die if this was actually a true story? The fish didn't die. They didn't have to die. It's only on dry land, those who died. God wiped out every living thing on the earth, people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, the birds of the sky, all were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with them on the boat, and the floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days. Now, the reason I mention, all that is it's interesting how the Bible supports. Some people are like, is this really an event that happened? Did really the flood take place? Well, first, you go within the context of the Bible. So in 2 instances, one, I believe it's in 1 Peter chapter 3, maybe in 1 Peter chapter 5, he refers to the flood. In Psalms 104, verse 5 through 9, it says, you placed the world on its foundation so it would never be moved. You clothed the earth with floods of water that covered even the mountains. And so he mentions, there's the writer, that's earlier. So you have a writer that's earlier, in the Old Testament, I believe that's David. And then later, Peter in the New Testament, still affirming that this flood event happened. Now, here's what's even more fascinating. Literally hundreds of people groups, tribes, tongues, and language, people groups, have their own accounts and legends of the flood. One of the most remarkable is the Babylonian account, which is similar to the Genesis account in many ways and is clearly drawn from this Genesis account. Since all mankind came from Noah's son, all mankind will remember the flood. So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds, and you're like, now the little details might be different, but all these tribal languages. And so, 150 days, again, suggests that God, put many of these wild animals into a period of hibernation. So we know that bears hibernate and maybe put other animals into hibernation. We don't know how they did in terms of less food, space, supervision that was needed, but we just know that God can be able to accomplish that. Here's another fascinating thing. When I was in Arizona, we were in Sedona. And Sedona is higher up in the mountains. I think it's about 3,500, maybe 4,300, elevation that's high. It's up near Prescott. And we decided to do one of these timeshares. And one of the timeshares gave us a helicopter tour. So we got in a helicopter. And as we were flying around, the guy, who was riding the helicopter said, hey, one of the interesting things about, Sedona and some of the rocks and the red rocks you see is that there have been found hundreds, if not thousands, of seashells, been found in this area as well as places like the Grand Canyon. And we don't know how it came. And I'm thinking to myself, I know exactly how it came. If you study, archaeology, you will find evidence of a worldwide flood. Now, that's really, really important because, again, it substantiates that what's in the Bible is true. So people are going to argue about what was said, maybe even some of the events. But when you start talking about history and archaeology and science, it doesn't actually disprove the Bible. It actually proves that it's a reliable historical source. The greatest historical source that's ever been written. I was listening to some thoughts on Homer's Iliad and some of these other things, like, well, did this really happen? This really happened. People take such facts